Alright, Torah lesson number 1, introduction. The Torah, also known in Greek as the Septuagint, known by the Samaritans as the Pentateuch, for 5 books. Septuagint being 70 for the 72 men who worked on the book in the Greek translation. And the Torah being instruction. And the Torah was written post-captivity. And that's important to understand, is that post-captivity refers to when the Jews were freed by Cyrus, king of Persia, to allowed to go back to their land in Jerusalem and rebuild the temple that was there previous. And then you have the Samaritans, who were Assyrian inbred transplants. They had Assyrians brought in to the northern kingdom, who settled and interbred with the previous house of Israel to become the Samaritans, as they were referred to or called. And so the Jews who returned, Babylonians, did not intermix. Archaeological evidence shows that the captive Jews were in the land of Ur in a segregated community, and they have documents from that community, but no scriptural texts from that community. And that's where what's called the oral law comes from, is the lack of the written word. And as a result, in this post-captivity time period, you have an oral tradition of those who passed on the memories, because their words were destroyed by the Babylonians and were denied having their word in Babylon, as Babylon tried to, even though they were segregated as a Jewish community, forced to assimilate into Babylonian culture and traditions and scriptures. And when you look at the Bible text, the Torah, you realize that there are Babylonian influences in the record because of this captivity. And the oral tradition was what people could remember, not having access to scriptures. And of course you need to make it valid, so they say, well, it comes from Moses, as Moses is attributed to being the author of the Torah, the 5 books. And so in this post-captivity period, you have the Septuagint wanting to be written, as Ezra, previous to that time period, and I believe it's Hezekiah, finds a scripture, or a scroll of scripture, and that's supposed to indicate that they were the ones who wrote the Torah, but we have no direct evidence of that other than what's said in the Tanakh portion of the Torah. And the Septuagint is the Greek translation The Hebrew translation, as far as evidence shows, goes as far back as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so it's after the Septuagint, though the Septuagint in its original form has not been recovered either. And so the Septuagint is actually a duplicate of the original. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls Hebrew is the oldest known scriptural text of the Bible, of the Torah. And it happens to correspond more closely to the Masoretic text that was developed between 800 to 1000 CE. And that's a long time away from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So for the Masoretic text to correspond more closely to the Dead Sea Scrolls confirms that version over all the other biblical Hebrew texts. And hold on a second. Let me pause. So the Dead Sea Scrolls included other information not contained in the Torah or the other Tanakh portions and stories. One of the Babylonian influenced, which is actually Assyrian influenced, documents still contained in the Tanakh is the book of Ishtar, Esther as it is known in English. Ishtar is a Mesopotamian goddess, and so the northern tribes being portrayed with one of their own being called Ishtar leads to a Mesopotamian influenced document. And then you have Mordecai, who's Marduk. So there's direct comparisons that the story was originally a Mesopotamian story, and either the Jewish author, post-captivity Jewish author, or it depends on who's the author of the book. Clearly the Torah author or authors are different from the Tanakh authors, and that it was the Masoretes who selected what was to be included in the Torah and what was to be included in the writings and the prophets. And that's why the apocryphal writings are not included in the Tanakh. The story of Maccabees, which is a beginner's guide to how Hanukkah got started, and even my favorite is the story of Bel, and an added book to the book of Daniel, and that was not included in the Tanakh either. But the book of Daniel, you can clearly tell that it's writing to the Babylonian captive Jews in Ur, even though it's a post-captivity writing, so that it's talking to a post-captivity Jewish audience using the story of captivity Jews, and how trying to teach the lesson that our ancestors were captive in Babylon, but they stayed true to the Jewish way and did not succumb to the cultural influencing of the Babylonians. And as the Tanakh was written in a post-captivity Jewish world, most likely in the Greek period, because the Dead Sea Scrolls were written in the Roman period. If the book of Daniel was written in this transition period between Greek and Roman, you then see that the author of the book of Daniel was communicating to the Hellenized or Romanized Jews, trying to convince them to stay Jewish and not succumb to the assimilation of either the Greek or Roman cultures and their ways and their scriptures. Unfortunately, the Torah and even the Tanakh stories have Babylonian, if not Mesopotamian, as I mentioned with the Book of Esther, Ishtar, influencing. And that's what this series is going to be about, is going over the Torah with the influences from Babylon, from Mesopotamia, versus the actual origin scriptures, which came from the Egyptians. And I'll point out those as we get to them, because scholars make mistakes in assuming there are Assyrian or Babylonian influences when they're not actually those influences. They actually come from Egyptian. And so we'll go over that as we go through this. And so understanding the origin of the Torah is essential in recognizing what was left out of the Torah, what needs to be put back into the Torah, and corrections needed to be made in the Torah, and so that the Torah can be purified and not mixed with multiple stories from different cultural influencing. And so that's the introduction for this series.